welcome everyone. I will go ahead and get us started. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon. So this is just a Q&A time. This is a time to answer and ask any questions we have about planting a church in Lincolnton. Because as I mentioned on Sunday, we've never done this before. This is new for all of us. And so we're all having to figure out, okay, how do we do this? Here, I'm gonna go ahead and mute you guys because there's some background noise. Perfect. But you can unmute yourself. Or if you can't figure that out, you can just wave at me and I'll unmute you from here if you've got a question. But this is our time to basically just discuss and ask any questions we have about this church planting process. Now, I fully recognize we don't have all the answers yet. But we're in process, and so we can share what that process is. As you heard 2 Sundays ago, our goal is to have this church up and running by late August or early September, kind of right after Labor Day. That's a natural time where people are going back to school, you're kind of starting off a fall, the new year, and during those natural times in culture, are when people kind of think about church if they've never gone to church before. You know, it's the same thing when Easter's coming up and people go, maybe I'll look for a church. School starting is one of those. So we're hopeful that we can start at that time. The biggest challenge in this will just be the pandemic. Obviously, we don't want to launch a church if having big meetings is still not safe. So it's going to be a moving target, but we wanted to at least get something on the board so that if we need to push it back, we can, but hopefully we won't have to. Obviously, rates are going down right now. It's looking better. So hopefully that date will work out okay. So we've got that date in mind, and it is a partnership between Unity and the presbytery. So the presbytery has not started a new church in probably about a decade. And they asked me to chair a committee that creates a strategy for planting new churches. And so I'm chairing that committee with about 5 other pastors on that committee in our presbytery. And the model we came up with was a partnership model. So that way, an individual church doesn't bear the entire burden of planting a church, and neither does the presbytery. Both the church and the presbytery have certain responsibilities so that they can work together. They are stakeholders kind of in partnership to ensure that this church is a successful church plant, at least to the best of their ability. So we have worked very closely with presbytery, and then we've also spent a good deal of time talking with those former members of the First Presbyterian Church of Lincolnton, because we just want to hear about the heart of Lincolnton. You know, what is that area like? What made that church really special? All of those sorts of questions. And so those conversations continue as well. But the long story short is that the presbytery agreed. They said, yeah, we, you know, after 205 years of ministry in Lincolnton, we want to ensure that there's a Presbyterian presence that continues. That was really the heart of Unity, and Presbytery agrees with that. And so we are excited about this possibility of planting a church, but we know there's probably lots of questions. So I want to open it up to you guys. What questions or comments do you have about the process of us planting a church in Lincolnton? And once again, you can unmute yourself or you can wave at me and I will unmute you.
Hey, David, it's Rick. I was waving and waving, but I can't get my camera to work. So.
Oh, no.
Hey, so the question I have, I guess, is the first one. When you guys did the presbytery or whoever did a great job of giving us the numbers and some of the statistics for the area. The question I guess I would have is, what area did that actually, was it a 10-mile radius of downtown Lincolnton, or was it county, or exactly what were those parameters?
It's a great question. So Rick is making note that we have done a demographic study, and that's available on our website, unitypres.org, where I filmed a video. It's about 25 minutes going through the demographics of Lincolnton. And so to your question, Rick, that was within a 5-mile radius of the former church's address. And if you've been to the former church, Presbyterian Church in Lincolnton, it is right downtown. It is like a block behind is it the Court Street?
Courthouse.
Yeah. And
It's the court.
Yep. So it's just right there in downtown, a 5-mile radius around there. Good question. Other questions or comments?
David, did
Yes.
a lot of the people that you talked to that were former members or former attendees express a desire to keep coming there? I don't know why the reason that they had to close the doors
Yeah, Connie, it's
was,
a
but
great question. And so when I talked with them, I very much said, hey, we want to continue Presbyterian presence. We would love for you to be involved, but also recognize that there's a lot of grief that comes with closing a church. And so wanted to give space for that. And so we haven't asked anyone, hey, are you in? Are you going to help us plant a church? Although I think they know that invitation is there. What I'm hearing lately, though, is that there are quite a few who are interested. And they're just kind of waiting to see, well, what are the details, going to be, and I think part of that is space. I think that their building that they used for so long is really special. And it's run into some physical issues right now that the presbytery is working through. And so we don't have much information yet on, is that building able to be used? And I think some people are waiting to hear that. And I've heard like, okay, yeah, we want to be a part of it, but I'm not sure we can just go to some, storefront or rental. So they're just kind of waiting to see, well, what's that going to look like? And we're kind of waiting too, for Presbytery to figure out, is that building able to be restored or not?
right. It's a huge building.
Yep.
And I thought maybe that might be part of, maybe they couldn't keep it up or something. Could be part of the reason that they closed down. I don't really care why they closed, but.
Yeah. And so, so Connie, it's a great question. And I think there's definitely people interested. Peggy or Judy, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, Judy could probably add more than I can, because I've been in Boone for a lot of the time, but I've also been a member of this church of the First Presbyterian Church for 43 years or more. And what has happened when I would come home to visit from Boone, the congregation has declined over the years, by people moving away, by people getting older, by death, anyway, so we could no longer sustain ourselves. And there are issues with the building. There was a main issue. I cannot describe it. Judy could do that much better than I. And we were not able to take care of all of that. And so we could not sustain ourselves any longer. That was it. We loved that church. I didn't want to leave it.
Yeah.
And I've cried buckets of tears about it, because it has been my church, and I've worked there as their director of music for 26 years. So my heart has been in that church and in that building. I've seen so many good things and people come and go since 1977. I have been in that church. So I love it. I love the building. I love everything about it. But it had problems. And I wonder how long it will be before Presbytery would come to a decision about, well, you could use that building. I'm not sure they know.
Right. I don't think they know either. But as soon as they do know, that's going to help us in our planning, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Judy, do you want to add anything to that? Doesn't sound like it. Other questions or comments?
David, what are kind of the next steps do you see, in the process? And obviously waiting for a location and all that, but even pre that, or what's kind of the milestones, and maybe that might be on the near horizon,
Yeah, great question, Russ. So we have reached the phase where we're kind of advertising, letting people know this is happening, this is the date that we're wanting this to happen. So that's the biggest thing right now, is trying to spread the word so that people are aware. We filmed that video to let people know. And I think it was shared like 45 times on Facebook, a lot in Lincolnton. And so there's a little bit of a buzz right now that this is happening. So that's good. And then we want to turn that buzz into people who say, oh yeah, I want to be a part of that new church. So I'm asking them to just email me their interest. And I've gotten several emails already from people saying, I want to be a part of that. Yeah, let me know what the next steps are in Lincolnton. So that's what we're doing on our end. We're advertising and trying to form a core group who will be that group to help launch that new congregation. Then kind of behind the scenes, we're trying to work with Presbytery to figure out, is the building usable? And if not, what's plan B? But then also we're working with Presbytery's Committee on Ministry to have them approve a job description for a pastor of the Lincolnton congregation, because we really want that person in place by early summer, hopefully by June, so that that person can begin, laying the groundwork of launching that church just a couple months later, forming those relationships, that sort of thing. So we've got a couple of people on our session who have volunteered to be a part of that hiring committee. And I'm recruiting a couple of people from Presbytery to be a part of that as well, in hopes that, all of that looks like it'll come together about mid-March to get that approved. And then we can begin looking for that pastor. So that's
David?
Yes.
Could I ask a question? Since I wish that there were more people here this afternoon from First Presbyterian, I don't know where they are. And I think that maybe 4 o'clock in the afternoon might not be a good time for them to be here. I don't know. With COVID, communication is not what we'd like it to be.
Sure.
So I don't know what everybody is doing and where they are. However, I have talked to several people. Anyway, hiring a new minister, when I saw that, I said, oh my gosh, how are you going to do that? Who's going to pay for that new minister?
It's a great question. So for funding a new congregation, it comes primarily from the presbytery and from the denomination. The denomination has what's called the 1,001 New Worshiping Communities, where they offer grants to do this very thing that we're doing. It's kind of reimagining worship, and so we're reimagining, what does Presbyterian worship look like in Lincolnton? And so it mainly comes from the grant funding, and then from Presbytery committing to this kind of new church for about a 5-year time frame. So those are the two sources initially. And then as you build the congregation, obviously the tithes, offerings, and all of that will go to support that as well. And I'll mention as well, Peggy, we had probably 4 or 5 different members of First Pres Lincolnton on Sunday, because this is an identical meeting to that. So that's where some people are as well. Other questions?
David, can you hear me?
Yes,
Can
I
you
can.
hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I really don't have a question, but I was muted or something a while ago, and I was talking away, and
Oh,
you
no.
couldn't hear me.
Sorry.
Well, I was agreeing with Peggy and what she said about the church and why we had to close. And yes, it was basically a lack of membership and funds to upkeep that huge building. There were a lot of issues. And then, of course, we had the problem with the preschool, and that was just pretty much the end of it. We just could not afford to keep up the church anymore.
Mhm. And I think that is one fear that Presbytery has, is if we go back into that building, we can't just do the same thing, you
Right.
know? And so they've definitely let us know, okay, it's got to be a new expression of worship, to help a new community, you know, sustain that church. They've really kind of impressed that upon us. And so if we use that space, it's still, they're like, it's gonna have to look somewhat different. Or if we use a different space, you know, kind of same thing. So it's definitely gonna have to be new, in hopes of then allowing something to be vibrant for, you know, decades in the future.
David, could you talk a little bit about the high level process of creating a Presbyterian church? I've been through this in a Baptist church, but I imagine it's a lot different, or
Sure.
a good bit different.
I'd be happy to. So, polity-wise, we have to officially form what's called a new worshiping community. So it's not even technically called a church yet at that point. It is a kind of just a new worshiping community, which gives you more flexibility with how you create that community. But over time, as you grow your membership and as you formalize your structures, you can seek to charter a congregation, and then you become an actual church.
So you do create a church charter?
Correct, correct. And that happens, you know, there's no firm timetable. It's more when the church feels like, okay, we can sustain
ready.
ourselves enough. Exactly, we're ready. So who knows when that would be? It could be 2 years, it could be 5 years. It's just dependent on what's happening in the community.
So David, the question I have is, I guess it goes back to just being really optimistic about unity and all the great things we have going on and our continued growth once we get through this craziness. And when we look at the population of Denver, and anyone who's driven through Denver today can see that it's easy for us to probably have 10,000 new homes within 5 years. I think that's the latest numbers. So with that said, has Unity, or will Unity consider, I mean, will our presbytery consider, since we can't expand Unity in the future, will we consider that in the siting of a new church? Will we consider the population of Denver and where the church has been historically in the downtown of Lincolnton, would they look at moving it closer, you know, to the boundaries where the population is increasing?
So that's
Or
a
would they-
good question.
Yeah.
So if I hear you right, are you wondering, with this Lincolnton plant, would we look to move it closer to the kind of Denver boundary, or with future plants?
One or both, and
Okay.
and I would hope and pray that with the growth of this community, that in the love of God, that we'll be able to expand and have a new Lincolnton church and a new Presbyterian church once we outgrow, which we will. I mean, we all know at Unity we can only grow to a certain population because we're locked and we have no more real estate. So
Right.
I just wonder if there's any consideration of that with the folks that are planning on the presbytery side.
So I would say yes, and I would say everything's on the table. Presbytery is looking at this Lincolnton church as almost like a pilot model, to say, because they've never done a partnership before with a like local church and the presbytery. And so they're saying, okay, let's try this. And if this works, we'd like to do it again in other areas of the presbytery that show potential. And so that's how we're really framing this, as a, hey, this is a pilot almost. And let's see if we can pull this off, and we'll take lots of notes while we do it, in hopes that then another local church that's similar to Unity, that's growing and vibrant, can replicate this in another part of the presbytery. And but I could also see that if it's going very well, and unity continues to grow, which I expect we will, we could do that in another part of even Denver. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We've had good conversations with Cheryl's Ford Presbyterian. They're an interested partner in all this conversation. They're growing quite a bit. So I think there's a lot of potential to do just what you're talking about, Rick. We're also looking at West Asheville. They're growing quite a bit and don't have a Presbyterian church. And so Presbytery is kind of saying, okay, if this goes well in Lincolnton, maybe that's the next spot we do something a year or two down the road.
Thank you. That's exciting.
Yeah, I think so too. I think they were just getting tired of closing churches and said, well, we need to open some. Other questions?
One thing about membership, we were not able to get new members. We continued to lose members. So I'm just really concerned that we would not be able to get enough members to start a new church.
Yes. Yeah, and Judy, that's a good concern. And I completely understand it. Membership is, the driving force of a congregation. We hope to have a core group of between 40 and 50 people to even start this. But that's the work right now, is spreading this word, getting people to commit, and launching kind of large in one sense, so that people feel like, hey, there's something going on here that I want to be a part of. But Judy, you outlined the challenge of it, and that's going to be the challenge.
David?
Yes, Peggy.
Let me see, how can I pose this question? I know, do you think that no matter how far along we are in the interest, do you believe that the presbytery is definitely going to go ahead with hiring a minister? And I ask this question because it seems to me that with a minister on the ground here, working toward this, that would enhance the possibility. I'm not saying this quite like I'd like to. Let me back up and say it another way. Will they go ahead and hire a minister no matter where we are? Is that the next step, a definite step, let me say? Or are you waiting for something else, more interest, more people to speak up before you hire that minister?
Okay, I see what you're saying. It's a great question, Peggy, because I
did it in a confusing way, and I'm sorry.
That's all right. I too believe that having that minister in place, getting to know the people of Lincolnton is crucial to the success of this church plant. And so we are committed to going ahead with that. That is it needs to be officially approved. The job description does, by COM, but they've already reviewed it and have asked for some tweaks. We've made those, and they plan to then discuss it and most likely approve it at their next meeting, which I believe is the first week in March. And so we will know very, very shortly, whether that's official, but I don't see any reason why it would not be at this point. So that's the one thing we're kind of waiting on. But once they vote, we can go full steam ahead in having that person in place.
Is that voting by the committee on ministry, or is that by the presbytery itself? And I don't understand.
It's by the committee on ministry. They're the ones who are in charge of, allowing pastors to come and go, basically.
I see.
Yes. That's a good question, Peggy.
I remember, yeah, I've never been a part of planting a new church or start, but I remember many, many years ago, a friend of ours, and this happened to be in the Methodist church, was sent by the Methodist conference to Charlotte, to a location in Charlotte where there were a lot of homes being built. Now, this is a long time ago, and they literally sent him to where there was no church and said, now you go and you knock on doors and you go into that neighborhood and you build a new church. And that church still stands today.
I love it.
And this is many years ago, but is that I wonder, is that the sort of thing that a new minister could do here?
Yes. So that would be what a new minister would be signing up for, where it is not a traditional call. You know, it is a call where we say, hopefully we can provide you with a core group, but then from there, it's mobilizing that core group with the pastor to knock on doors, to show up at the PTA meetings, to show up at the county commissioner meetings, and just get to know the community and grow the church from the inside out.
Mm-hmm. So
it's a pretty unique job description. You know, not just any pastor is going to sign up for that.
No, I can imagine. Yes, it has to be sort of somebody who is as excited as you sound for your church there, and a real stem winder, you know, who's willing to go out where there is no church and almost go out like Paul went all over the place. You know, he'll be a present day Paul, establishing churches here and there, you know.
Yep. You know, that's exactly right. It's reclaiming some of what we see in the book of Acts, where you just get to know people. And then
I was thinking about Paul in the book of Acts, or in his letters to all the churches that he established. Also, I don't know how it would work, but I would like to see a church that is diverse.
Yes. Oh, I would too. My family would love that. Since my children are diverse, that would just warm my heart.
We have a large in Lincolnton. There is, I remember this from my teaching, and I retired 13 years ago, but we have a large Hispanic community in Lincolnton.
Oh,
quite large.
Good. Well, that's just good to know. And we need to think through, how do we get to know that population?
Probably a lot of them go to St. Dorothy's Catholic Church, but there's still, there can always be a Spanish, somebody who interprets, and somebody, if there were a church that, it's just a possibility. I believe in diversity.
Yes, it is. It's thinking outside the box, which is what we need to be doing.
David, speaking of thinking outside the box, this may be one of those ideas. We have watched in this area for a number of years of some churches that have come up from meeting in storefronts to mega churches now. And it's so encouraging to drive down through Denver on a Sunday and watch police direct traffic out of the church. So what I'm thinking is, anyone in the presbytery thought about talking to some of the ministers of these grassroots efforts that have started in storefronts, and maybe just saying, hey, tell us what you would do differently, or get some lessons learned, because we have some wonderful examples and we still see it. We still see church signs coming up that, you know, they're being under construction.
Rick, that's a fabulous idea, because I don't think we've had those conversations yet, but we absolutely should. So we've got a meeting tomorrow. I'm going to put that on their agenda to say, hey, let's go have those conversations. Let's interview people. What did they do? Because I think you're right. If we can't use the current building, I think that's probably going to be the alternative. But we've seen success with that alternative as well. And so there's, you know, I think either way you go, you've got some pros there. So that's good.
And really, I mean, whether they're building in Denver or Lincolnton, I mean, those lessons could be applicable. So the only other point I would make, and I guess it just goes with being a long time and one of the older folks on the call at Unity, but and Janine might remember part of this, but there was a time at Unity that we had to go to the presbytery to pay our electric bills. And that's in my lifetime. And there was a time at Unity when you had to call the church on Sunday morning if you wanted heat in the nursery, if you're going to have a child in the nursery. So I say that just to say God has grown Unity from a church of that membership of about 180 members 30 years ago into what we are today. So He's this church into whatever God wants us to be too. So just a note of encouragement and, note of history since I'm getting old.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate that, because the encouragement there is that any church can grow, because it's not about the church. It's about what's God is doing through the people of that church. And I think Denver here at Unity we're an example of that. And I believe Lincolnton can be as well.
Mhm. I'm a little bit concerned, and I don't know how Judy feels about this, but COVID has caused us to press pause on so many things, but I've been in Boone, and I don't know what's happened to all of our people. Where are they? Have they gotten involved in other churches? They were such faithful Presbyterians, but I don't know where they are. I know someone is going to Pine Street Church, and Pine Street Church is still remains active, and then Ironton Presbyterian. I don't know what they're doing. They seem to retain their independence. So there is a Presbyterian presence with those two churches here. Right, David?
Yes, that's correct. I've spoken with the pastor of Ironton, and they haven't met through COVID, so they're at a full pause right now. But he said even when they did meet, there were maybe 8 to 10 people on a Sunday, and he's hoping that maybe they can be a part of whatever this becomes. And then I've played quite a bit of phone tag with the pastor of Pine Street, because I think partnering with them for something seems to be the right thing to do, since they're also, in the Lincolnton vicinity. Other thoughts and questions?
David, I think one thing I haven't had, in my experience, haven't had a lot of success with knocking on doors, but I have more success and seen more success when new neighbors move in. If you invite them to church, or just friends that might be looking for a church or want to change churches, invite them to church.
Yes, I think you're exactly right. And here at Unity, we have a program where if someone moves in this area, then they automatically get a postcard from us that just welcomes them, invites them to church. So we would plan to create something very similar in Lincolnton, because those are those life, change opportunities where someone moves and they go, okay, I'm interested in a church. So being the first one to have your hand out to say, hey, we'd like to invite you, is what we want to do.
I'll never forget when we moved to Lincolnton in 1977. My husband bought a business here, and we moved to Lincolnton. He came before the children and I came to get the business going. And there was a woman in the church at the time, Sue and Jack Ramseur, who were pillars of this church, as Judy can attest to. Their son Rick is still still with us here. Anyway, before Ray came in April, the children and I didn't come until school was to start in August, but Sue Ramseur was at his office with an offering of goodies. She had heard that this family was coming to Lincolnton from Charlotte, and that they were Presbyterians, and she was bound, bit, and determined that they would go to no other church until they had been visited by Presbyterians. But this was Sue. We used to call her the Christian terrorist, but she, oh goodness, she would turn over in her grave if she knew now that our church was no longer active. But anyway, she did her part, right, Judy?
Right.
I love
She
that.
did yeah, she did the same thing to us. But on the I'll have to say this, I guess she was only visiting people that she knew were already Presbyterian. I don't know that she just went out and invited any new person to Lincolnton.
No, she found out if you were
She
Presbyterian.
found out you were
She was
already
the first to
Presbyterian.
visit you.
Oh,
Yeah.
Right.
I love that.
She was not proselyting, if that's still a word.
Just invitations. That's great.
I will say that the way social media is working now, you can do a lot of targeting of your particular demographic of people who think say they're Presbyterian, people of certain age groups, men, women, all sorts of stuff. So the way social media works, we're going to be relying on that too. And that's another thing, Russ, that you ask, what can people do? You can share. If you see it, share it, because somebody's going to pick up on it that's maybe going to share it again, or maybe they need it, or maybe hey, my parents are moving here next month. They need to see this, or you never know.
Yeah. I've joined, there's a Lincolnton Facebook group, like Lincolnton Town Talk, just like Denver has a Town Talk, and it's very active. And I posted our video that we filmed to say, hey, we're starting a new church. And the moderator declined it and said, we only post about businesses on Fridays. I was like, oh, okay, that's much more formal than the Denver one. I'll get back to you on Friday.
What was
There's
that?
also-
I missed that.
It's called Lincolnton Town Talk. It's a Lincolnton Facebook group that has thousands of people on it. It was very active.
Oh,
There's also L-Town Radio.
Okay.
Look at L-Town Radio.
Yeah. Janine and I are working on the marketing strategy, so that's great. Well, good. Well, I don't want to take too much of your time, but are there any other questions that we can answer at this point in the process? Well, I thank you for joining us today. More questions will come, so don't hesitate to call or email myself or Janine. We're kind of heading this up, and we'll continue to share with the congregation on Sunday mornings what they can do to help. But at this point, the biggest thing we can do is pray, because I believe God wants a vibrant church in Lincolnton, and I'm really excited for what God's already doing in laying the groundwork for that. So why don't we go to God in prayer? God, thank you for this group, and thank you for the group that met on Sunday to talk about this real possibility of planting a church in Lincolnton and reaching people who have never been to church before and who don't know the good news of the gospel and how much you love them. God, we want to be your vessels. Yeah, please use us, Lord, so that we can create a church that lasts for another 200 years. Thank you for the faithful ministry of First Presbyterian Church of Lincolnton and all of the good that they've done in that community for generations. And may whatever comes next build upon that faithful legacy. God, we commit this whole endeavor to you, knowing that if you are leading, God, we are choosing to follow. Amen. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Yep.